rage, ruin, and redemptions. Quiet path, the silence, was the loudest thing. It wasn't a peaceful, quiet, it was a vacuum, a breathless void where the oxygen used to be. Elias stood in the center of the garage, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. The aluminum baseball bat hung loosely in his grip, vibrating with residual energy. Around him lay the wreckage of 10 years of marriage and 3 years of a specific, cherished dream. The sailboat, a 20-foot wooden kestrel he'd been restoring with his daughter, Maya, was splintered. The beautiful mahogany hull, which he'd spent countless weekends sanding until it felt like silk, was stoven. The mast was snapped over his workbench. Tools were scattered like shrapnel. But the real destruction wasn't wood or metal. It was the memory of the sound that preceded the silence. The high-pitched terror in Maya's scream and the guttural, terrified sob of his wife, Sarah, as she shielded their child's eyes from the monster her father had become in a heartbeat. They were gone now. The sound of Sarah's tires screeching out of the driveway 10 minutes ago was the period of the end of the sentence of his life. Elias dropped the bat. It clattered against the concrete, the noise sickeningly bright. He looked at his hands. They didn't feel like his own. They were weapons that had betrayed his heart. The rage had come upon him like a rogue wave sudden, overwhelming, and birthed from a deep ocean of unaddressed pressure. A lost contract at work, a mounting mortgage, a feeling of shrinking inadequacy that he stuffed down daily. When he'd come home to find Maya had accidentally spilled paint on his final blueprints, the dam broke. It wasn't about the blueprints. It was never about the blueprints. It was about the terrifying feeling of losing control, manifesting as an explosion designed to regain it through force. He sank to the cold concrete floor amidst the sawdust and splinters, pulling his knees to his chest. The red mist cleared, leaving behind a paralyzing gray fog of shame. He had torched his own kingdom. The first month was a blur of cheap motel rooms and the metallic taste of cheap whiskey. Elias functioned on autopilot. He went to work, kept his head down, and avoided mirrors. He couldn't bear to look at the man who had terrified an 8-year-old girl. Sarah wouldn't speak to him, communicating only through a severe-looking lawyer. The temporary restraining order was a piece of paper that felt heavier than a tombstone. He returned to the empty house only once, under supervision, to collect his clothes. The garage had been cleaned. The wreckage of the boat was gone. Sarah had erased the evidence of his violence, but the empty space where the vessel used to sit was a gaping wound. On the floor, near where the bow had been, he found a single, forgotten object. A small brass cleat Maya had polished until it shone like gold. She'd been so proud of that small contribution. Elias picked it up, the cold metal biting into his palm. He squeezed it until his hand cramped, until the physical pain subsided enough to let the emotional agony through. Standing in that hollow garage, the whiskey fog lifted, and he finally wept. He wept guttural, ugly sounds that echoed off the bare walls. He cried for the fear in Maya's eyes, for the trust he had shattered in Sarah, and for the pathetic weakness of a man who used rage as a shield against vulnerability. He realized that his anger hadn't made him strong, it had made him solitary. Healing didn't begin with a grand gesture. It began in a basement room of a community center, sitting on a folding chair in a circle of other broken men. "My name is Elias," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "And I burned down my life because I didn't know how to say I was scared." The therapy was excruciating. It was surgery without anesthesia. He had to excavate the roots of his rage, tracing them back to a father who believed emotions were a defect and silence was strength. He had to learn a new language to the vocabulary of feeling, of pausing, of He kept the brass cleat in his pocket every day. It was his worry stone, his talisman of regret. Whenever the familiar heat began to rise in his chest when a boss criticized him, or traffic stalled, he touched the cold metal. It grounded him. It reminded him of the cost of the explosion. 6 months passed. He moved into a small, Spartan apartment. It had no garage, no workshop, just the essentials. He wasn't ready to build anything yet. He was still trying to shore up his own foundation. He wrote letters, not asking for forgiveness. He knew he hadn't earned that, but taking accountability. "Sarah, I know. Sorry. It's a useless word right now. I'm not asking you to let me back in. I just need you to know that I understand what I broke. I'm working every day to ensure the man you saw that night never exists again. He wrote a separate letter for Maya, filled with drawings of sea creatures, apologizing for scaring her, telling her the boat was never more important than she was. He didn't send hers. The lawyers said it wasn't time. A year after the incident, he was granted a supervised visit in a neutral family center. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale popcorn. When Sarah walked in with Maya, Elias felt his breath catch. Maya looked older, taller. She stayed glued to her mother's side, her eyes wide and wary. She looked at him like a stranger she'd been warned against. The pain of that look was worse than any physical blow. It was the true consequence. He had planted fear where love used to grow. "Hi, sweet pea," he said, his voice trembling. Maya didn't answer. She buried her face in Sarah's coat. Sarah looked at him. Her gaze wasn't angry anymore. It was just incredibly sad. "She's having nightmares again, Elias, because of the court date coming up." "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he whispered. "Don't," she said, raising a hand. "Don't apologize. Just be better. That's all you can do. Be better from over there, until maybe, someday." She doesn't flinch when she hears a loud noise. The hour was excruciating. They played a board game in near silence. He didn't try to hug Maya. He didn't push. He just existed in the space, trying to radiate a calm he was only just learning to possess. When Tay left, Maya looked back once. It wasn't a look of longing, but curiosity, like she was trying to reconcile the monster of her memory with this quiet, sad man in the beige sweater. Elias returned to his small apartment that evening. It was quiet, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of the wreckage anymore. It was just stillness. He sat at his small kitchen table and took the brass cleat from his pocket, setting it in the center of the table. He knew he might never get his family back. The boat was gone. The trust was fractured, perhaps permanently. The regret was a chronic ache in his bones, a shadow that would follow him forever. But he wasn't the man with the bat anymore. He was a man sitting in the quiet, feeling the weight of his actions without crumbling under them. He was a man learning to live with the wreckage, piece by painful piece, hoping that one day he might build something small, sturdy, and true. He took a deep breath, picked up a pen, and opened his journal to start the hard work of the next day. The moral of the story is that untreated anger is a fire that burns down its own house, often destroying the very people it is meant to protect. True strength is not found in explosive outbursts meant to regain control, but in the vulnerability to admit fear and the quiet, disciplined courage to heal oneself before asking for forgiveness. While a man can rebuild his character, he must accept that some trust, once shattered, may remain permanently splintered, becoming a scar he must carry as the price of his redemption.